What I am observing in Iran right now represents the most dangerous convergence of domestic political collapse and nuclear weapons development in modern Middle Eastern history. And I need to be absolutely clear about what this means for regional stability and American strategic interests. The intelligence coming across my desk indicates that Iranian leadership has made a calculated decision that regime survival requires both comprehensive domestic crackdown and accelerated nuclear weapons development as insurance against international intervention. And we are looking at a timeline measured in weeks rather than months for both systematic regime violence and nuclear weapons capability that could fundamentally alter regional power relationships. The intelligence is crystal clear that Iranian protests have evolved beyond economic grievances into systematic challenges to Islamic Republic authority, while Iranian nuclear scientists at multiple facilities are working around the clock to achieve weapons-grade uranium production and weapons assembly capabilities that international inspectors cannot adequately monitor during domestic crisis conditions that prevent normal verification protocols and facility access. Congressional briefings indicate Iranian leadership believes nuclear weapons capability provides essential protection against regime change operations, while domestic opposition lacks organizational capability to prevent nuclear weapons development completion during continued social unrest and government crackdown. You know, what makes this Iranian crisis particularly urgent is the systematic coordination between Revolutionary Guard domestic suppression operations and nuclear weapons development acceleration that suggests Iranian leadership has concluded this represents optimal window for achieving nuclear capability, while international attention focuses on domestic humanitarian concerns rather than nuclear facility monitoring and proliferation prevention that normal diplomatic engagement would prioritize. Iranian regime calculation appears to be that international community cannot simultaneously address domestic human rights violations and nuclear weapons development, while Iranian leadership advances both domestic control and nuclear deterrence before external intervention becomes possible. I am analyzing intelligence assessments that detail Iranian coordination between domestic internet shutdowns, systematic protester detention, and nuclear facility security enhancement that prevents adequate international monitoring, while Iranian nuclear program achieves critical technical milestones toward weapons development that previous sanctions and diplomatic pressure were designed to prevent. The timing correlation between domestic crackdown intensity and nuclear development acceleration suggests systematic Iranian strategy for exploiting international crisis response limitations while achieving strategic objectives before coordinated international intervention becomes organizationally and politically feasible. But there is also the immediate Israeli response dimension that creates systematic risks for preventive military operations against Iranian nuclear facilities, while domestic Iranian crisis creates both optimal conditions for Israeli strikes and maximum risks for regional warfare escalation that could involve multiple Iranian proxy networks and regional allies simultaneously. Intelligence indicates Israeli military planning operates under compressed timeline assumptions about Iranian nuclear weapons development, while domestic Iranian instability creates strategic windows that may not align with regional stability requirements or alliance coordination capabilities for post-strike conflict management. What troubles me most about the regional implications is that Iranian regime survival strategy through nuclear weapons development and domestic violence occurs simultaneously with systematic Iranian proxy coordination throughout Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen that could create comprehensive regional warfare if Israeli preventive strikes or international intervention attempts to address either domestic repression or nuclear weapons development trigger Iranian retaliation through multiple proxy networks and regional missile capabilities that exceed previous Middle Eastern conflicts in scope and intensity. Congressional oversight reveals systematic gaps in American policy coordination for addressing simultaneous Iranian domestic crisis and nuclear weapons development, while existing authorities and strategic frameworks assume sequential rather than concurrent challenges that exceed traditional crisis management and policy response capabilities. American intelligence and diplomatic resources face unprecedented scenarios where humanitarian intervention concerns compete with nuclear proliferation prevention, while Iranian regime survival strategy exploits this policy complexity for strategic advantage and timeline compression. The nuclear weapons timeline implications suggest Iranian leadership believes current domestic crisis provides optimal cover for final nuclear weapons development phases, while international community struggles to coordinate effective responses to systematic human rights violations and nuclear proliferation simultaneously. Iranian calculation appears to be that nuclear weapons capability achievement before crisis resolution eliminates international intervention options while providing regime insurance against both domestic opposition and external pressure through nuclear deterrence and regional intimidation capabilities. I think what we need to understand immediately is that Iranian nuclear weapons development during domestic political collapse creates unprecedented proliferation risks if regime authority fragments, while nuclear weapons materials, technology, and expertise fall under control of various opposition groups, proxy organizations, or regional powers without adequate security protocols and international oversight that nuclear facility protection requires during political transition and governance instability scenarios. When I analyze Russian and Chinese coordination with Iranian regime during this crisis, what becomes clear is systematic great power support for Iranian nuclear development and domestic suppression through technology transfer, diplomatic protection, and sanctions evasion that enables Iranian regime's survival strategy while advancing Russian and Chinese strategic interests in regional instability and American alliance pressure that Iranian crisis creates for Middle Eastern security frameworks and international cooperation mechanisms. The immediate escalation triggers include potential Israeli military operations against Iranian nuclear facilities, systematic Iranian proxy retaliation across multiple regional theaters, and American military intervention scenarios that could rapidly expand beyond limited operations into comprehensive regional warfare involving multiple nations, proxy forces, and nuclear-capable regional powers simultaneously. Intelligence assessments indicate escalation scenarios could develop within days rather than weeks, depending on Israeli decision-making timelines and Iranian nuclear development milestones. But there is systematic opportunity for immediate American diplomatic intervention that addresses legitimate Iranian security concerns while preventing nuclear weapons development through comprehensive regional security frameworks, sanctions relief negotiations, and international monitoring agreements that provide Iranian regime with survival guarantees while ensuring nuclear weapons program abandonment and domestic violence cessation through coordinated international pressure and incentive coordination. Congressional intelligence oversight faces immediate challenges in providing real-time assessments of Iranian nuclear timeline, domestic opposition capabilities, and regional escalation risks, while Iranian information restrictions and security crackdowns prevent adequate intelligence collection about regime stability, nuclear development progress, and escalation intentions that crisis management and policy decision-making require for effective American response coordination and alliance partnership during fluid crisis conditions. What makes this crisis particularly dangerous for American strategic interests is that Iranian nuclear weapons development during domestic collapse demonstrates that comprehensive sanctions and diplomatic pressure cannot prevent determined nuclear weapons programs, while regional instability and great power competition provide systematic support for nuclear proliferation and authoritarian regime survival through external assistance and international law violation that traditional non-proliferation frameworks cannot address effectively. The immediate regional security implications include systematic preparation by Israeli, Saudi, and other regional powers for Iranian nuclear weapons capability, while Iranian proxy networks position for comprehensive regional warfare that could affect global energy supplies, international commerce, and regional stability in ways that exceed current American military positioning and alliance coordination capabilities for effective crisis management and conflict containment during simultaneous domestic and international Iranian crisis scenarios. Recovery scenarios from Iranian nuclear weapons achievement require comprehensive regional security reconstruction, non-proliferation enforcement, and governance transition assistance that exceed current international institutional capabilities, while Iranian crisis timeline prevents adequate preparation for post-nuclear Iranian regional relationships and security framework modification that nuclear weapons proliferation throughout the Middle East would require for sustained stability and American strategic interest protection. As I conclude this flash analysis, what we are looking at is systematic convergence of domestic Iranian collapse and nuclear weapons development that creates immediate timeline pressure for Israeli military intervention, American policy decision-making, and international crisis coordination, while Iranian regime survival strategy exploits crisis complexity and timeline compression for strategic advantage that could fundamentally alter regional power relationships and nuclear proliferation patterns within weeks of current domestic and nuclear crisis escalation.